The music swelled beneath the crystal chandeliers, laughter floated across the marble hall, and white roses framed the bride like a living dream. But in the middle of all that perfection, one man stood alone near the back wall, holding a paper plate he barely touched, staring a little too long at something he believed he had lost forever. And that was when a voice, low and steady, brushed against his ear. "Stop looking at the bride, look at me." Before we go any further, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet miracles that change ordinary lives, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this deserve to be heard. The wedding was held in a restored mansion overlooking Lake Michigan, just outside Chicago. Golden light poured through the tall windows as guests in designer suits and silk gowns clinked glasses and celebrated the union of Harper Collins and Mason Whitmore. It was the kind of event that ended up in society magazines, the kind that whispered wealth and influence without ever saying it out loud. Ethan Parker didn't belong there anymore. 3 years earlier, Ethan had once imagined standing at the altar with Harper. Back then, he had been a rising project manager at a small construction firm, working long hours while trying to hold together a fragile home. His wife, Rachel, had been fighting a quiet battle with depression after the birth of their son, Caleb. When she passed away unexpectedly, Ethan's world collapsed into hospital corridors and unpaid bills. Harper, who had been his college sweetheart before life pulled them apart, had re-entered his life briefly during those dark months. But grief makes people unpredictable. Ethan withdrew. He chose his son over everything, including love. And Harper, unable to compete with a ghost or a broken heart, eventually walked away. Now she was marrying a venture capitalist with a 7-figure smile. Ethan had come only because Caleb, now 4 years old with curious blue eyes and a constant need to hold his father's hand, had been invited as the flower boy. Harper had insisted. She said it was symbolic, a sign that there were no hard feelings. Ethan wasn't sure he believed that. He adjusted Caleb's tiny bow tie and forced a smile whenever someone offered pity disguised as politeness. He felt small in that room, like a smudge on polished glass. His suit was clean but old. His shoes were worn at the edges. He worked nights now as a warehouse supervisor in Aurora and spent his days packing lunches, reading bedtime stories, and learning how to braid tiny shoelaces with fingers more accustomed to blueprints. As the bride moved across the dance floor, radiant in satin and lace, Ethan felt something twist inside him. Not jealousy. Not exactly. It was the weight of what could have been. The life he once thought he'd build. The partner who might have shared his burdens. And then she appeared. Victoria Grant didn't need an introduction. The CEO of Grant Holdings, a logistics empire headquartered in downtown Chicago, she was known for buying failing companies and rebuilding them into industry leaders. At 42, she carried herself with sharp confidence, her dark hair swept into a sleek knot, her emerald gown understated yet commanding attention. She had arrived quietly, without an entourage, but everyone noticed. She had been watching Ethan for several minutes. When she leaned close and whispered those unexpected words, he stiffened. He had been staring at Harper again. Embarrassment flushed his cheeks as he turned. Victoria's eyes were not mocking. They were observant. Curious. And, strangely, gentle. She had seen the way he knelt earlier to wipe frosting from Caleb's face. The way he stayed near the edge of the dance floor, clapping for others while remaining invisible. She had seen the exhaustion in his shoulders and the devotion in his movements. Most people at the wedding saw a single father clinging to the past. Victoria saw resilience. Over the next hour, she maneuvered conversation toward him. She learned about Rachel. About the medical bills that had swallowed his savings. About how Ethan had once designed efficient warehouse layouts that reduced costs by 20% at his old firm. She listened as he spoke cautiously, as if hope were a fragile object that might shatter if handled too roughly. What Ethan didn't know was that one of Victoria's subsidiaries was struggling with exactly that problem: inefficient warehouse operations in their Midwest distribution centers. By the time the couple cut the cake, Victoria had made a decision. The following Monday, Ethan received a call he almost ignored, assuming it was another telemarketer. Instead, it was an assistant inviting him to interview for an operations consultant role at Grant Logistics. The salary mentioned was more than double what he currently earned. Ethan nearly declined. Fear has a way of disguising itself as practicality. He told himself he wasn't qualified, that executives didn't hire men who still shopped with coupons and worried about daycare costs. But Caleb, sitting on the living room floor building a crooked tower of blocks, looked up and asked why Daddy looked sad again. That question was enough. The interview was not easy. Victoria did not hand him anything. She challenged his ideas, pressed him for numbers, asked how he would handle resistant managers and shrinking margins. Ethan felt sweat gather at his collar, but something inside him awakened, the part that had once stayed up until 2 a.m. perfecting project plans. He spoke with clarity, sketched redesigns on a whiteboard, and forgot, for a moment, to doubt himself. 2 weeks later, he walked into a vast distribution center in Joliet as the newest senior operations strategist. The first months were brutal. Some employees resented him, whispering that he was a sympathy hire. Others doubted his experience. Ethan drove home many nights questioning whether he had made a mistake. But every morning, Caleb ran to the door, proud that his dad now wore a company badge with his name printed in bold letters. Victoria never micromanaged. She watched from a distance, offering feedback when necessary, allowing him space to grow. Slowly, the numbers shifted. Shipping delays decreased. Efficiency improved. Costs dropped. Ethan's ideas worked. More importantly, he began to breathe differently. He laughed again. He bought Caleb a small bicycle and spent Saturdays teaching him to ride along the Fox River Trail. He even framed a photo of Rachel on the living room shelf, no longer as a symbol of pain but as a reminder of love that had shaped him. 6 months after the wedding, Victoria invited Ethan to a charity gala in downtown Chicago. He hesitated at the memory of chandeliers and whispered regrets, but this time, he didn't stand against the wall. He stood beside the woman who had seen him when he felt invisible. There was no dramatic declaration. No fairy tale confession. Just two people who understood broken pieces and the courage it takes to rebuild. If this story has touched your heart so far, please pause and comment the word hope below. Let's fill the comments with reminders that no one's lowest moment defines their future. 1 year later, Ethan stood on a stage accepting an industry award for operational excellence on behalf of Grant Logistics. In the audience, Caleb waved wildly, nearly falling out of his seat. Victoria clapped, pride shining in her eyes. Ethan thought back to that wedding, the music, the white roses, the ache of watching someone else's happiness. He realized something profound. He had not been meant to look at the bride. He had been meant to turn his head, just slightly, and see the opportunity standing beside him. Life rarely shouts when it offers second chances. Sometimes it whispers. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that your pain is not permanent and your worth is not defined by loss, please like, share, and subscribe. Your engagement helps stories like Ethan's reach someone who may be standing alone at the back of their own crowded room, waiting for a whisper that changes everything. Because sometimes, the moment that feels like an ending is only the quiet beginning of something greater.